Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Not Reading for Content. We are so happy that you've decided to join us this week. This is our first day of discussing Inkheart. So, we will be discussing in this episode chapters 1 through 18. But before we get there, we do have our bookish bite and just a few housekeeping things to get through. First off, if you guys want to know our schedule, make sure and check out the description. You can figure out what we're reading next week and the books for the rest of the season that we have. And we're very excited for our translated works that we're going to get to and all the different languages that we're going to cover. So we hope that you'll join us for one or two books. I do have a question for you, Leandra, for our bookish bite of the week. And it's about audiobooks because I know that we both enjoy an audiobook. They're very, very convenient. We can do other things while we're reading. A lot of times they're very fun, but I do think that there are some downfalls to being an audiobook reader. I think that there's some things that we might miss, some chapter delicacies, if you will. There are things like epigraphs and illustrations and just other general formatting things that we don't get to see if we are reading a book via audio instead of reading it physically or on an e-reader. So I just wanted to know your opinion. What do you think?
Oh my gosh, yeah, and you know what's tough about this is if you only have access to the audio, you don't know what you're missing out on. I think that's my biggest problem with it is that only if you know what is to be there, you know that it's missing, which I guess is also a good thing. For instance, in this book, if you have the physical or ebook copy, you know that Inkheart has small, minute illustrations at the end of every single chapter. But if you didn't know that, would it impact your reading? Probably not. So I think that's also a discussion we need to have is sometimes it is important and they do have either, little Easter eggs or they do impact the plot. I mean, we see this with physical copies that aren't necessarily regarding within chapters, but at the beginning or end of a book, there might be maps, there may be an
Yes.
index, definitions, a family tree. Sometimes at the beginning of an audiobook, they will have maybe a PDF that you can download or something to that effect. I can tell you right now, I've never taken advantage of that when it's existed. So I think it depends on how much you think you're actually going to be referencing these items. I'm glad that you brought up the epigraph, though, actually, because that's another thing that's at the beginning of every single chapter. And they can be really fun because they're quotes, passages from past classic works which may or may not impact your expectations going into that chapter. But for some reason, and this isn't every single audiobook that would do this, but for some reason, the audiobook that you and I have does not read aloud the epigraphs. And I don't understand why. I feel like that's really odd choice to do, but for some reason, it just doesn't have it. And we wouldn't have noticed if we didn't both have a copy in front of us. You've got the physical book, I've got the ebook, and I told you this actually off recording that I was so startled because I started reading immersively and the audio was reading lines I couldn't see because I had to click to the next page to see where the book actually started because I was staring at this epigraph thinking, why aren't these words coming out of her mouth? Like, what is going on? And then I was like, oh, that's what's going on. So anyways, I feel like it's a bit of a double-edged sword where there are pros and cons, and more so the biggest thing is you don't know what you're missing out on. It's only an issue when you know what should be there, I suppose. What do you think?
Yeah, I have similar opinions. I'm glad that you mentioned a map because that is something that I can't remember what book it was, but there is a story that I was reading that definitely should have had a map. And I was reading it on audio. And I actually went and borrowed like the sample version on my Kindle just to see if there was a map that I was missing. And there was not. So the book just didn't have one. But you didn't know because I just had it on audio. So I wanted to check. I do think that there's a fine line between what I would like to have included in the audiobook. I always think the PDF comment at the beginning is nice, but I think it's a little extra if someone, for instance, recipes. There are some books that will include recipes in the storyline, and I think it's a little silly to read off every single ingredient and the
Oh,
fact
yeah.
that, we have 2 tablespoons of this and 2 teaspoons of this and a half of whatever. I don't need them to read that. But even if they just said, this recipe is included in the PDF document, just a reminder at the actual location of the image or of the recipe given, I think that that would be beneficial, because I also don't look at the PDF, because once they say it, it is out of my mind. I do
Oh
not
yeah,
think
I
about it
forget.
again.
I totally
Yeah.
forget that it's there. Mhm.
Yeah. So those little reminders I think would be helpful. I also think that there are certain things that have been included that I'm like, this is not helpful to me. I've had the family trees, or with certain fantasy books, they will have like a magic system, and they'll name like the members of each organization and each house. Gideon the Ninth is an example of this, and they will just read it off at the beginning, and you're just listening to a list of names because you know nothing about
Mhm.
the world building or anything, and you're like, okay, I don't know what this means. This is the first house, and this is the person who's in the first house. Cool. So I do think that it goes both ways. I think that there are definitely some advantages to audio. I really like an audiobook. I think that you can have a full cast of characters, and the narrators do an excellent job at giving characters life. But I think that it is also somewhat taking away of the little intricacies that you can have in text.
Yeah, and I feel like the reading aloud of a list of names is very unhelpful for most of us. And maybe they're thinking, well, what if someone who is listening to this truly is visually impaired or blind? So
Right.
to have the PDF is not helpful. So I totally get that. But I agree with you that there is this element where some of these things are essential, but there isn't a good way of providing it through audio. Because when we were talking about maps, I then was actually remembering how mysteries have a lot of blueprints, for
Mhm.
instance. You can see what's
Yes.
going on in the scene. And on top of that, at a book club that I host every single month, or every other month, we read a Christie, like an Agatha Christie.
Mhm.
And she's known for throwing in a million characters at the beginning and all of their relationships, and you don't know what's going on. But the reason why that's usually not a big deal, especially back when this was being published, is because classically, at the beginning of the book, there would be a character list. You would be provided a person's name, maybe a relationship, or even their profession, and then you could at least reference it when you needed it. Whereas with an audiobook, the only option they have is to just read it aloud to you one time, but you may need it at various times in the book. And so you would then just, take a second, flip back to the beginning, go down the list, find the thing you need, and then you could get back into the narrative. Whereas audio is just not very conducive to that. And so for those in my book club who do end up like listening on audio, I often go to my physical copy of an Agatha Christie, take pictures of the character list, and throw it in the Discord channel saying, okay, here's a list of characters. Get on Discord every time you want to know who a character is. And so it is kind of odd to think about that, where it feels weird to have it in there, but you do need that information. It's just there's no good way of providing it via audio.
Yeah. There's no right or wrong answer. We're just trying things out and seeing what works, and sometimes it lands and other times it doesn't. It's just how it will be. We do need to get to our discussion of Inkheart for the day. And Leandra, you have the task of summarizing these first 18 chapters for us. So let us know what happened.
Okay, I'll do my best. But this is a pretty chonky middle grade. A lot has happened. And so, really, I'm only going to be given the highlights. We end up meeting all of our main characters at the moment. Maggie is 12 years old. She lives with her father named Mo, who is a bookbinder. He tends to travel for work as well. And so, they haven't really been used to a home life that is settled. A lot of times they're moving about. And Maggie just views this as normal. They also are obviously a big fan of books as a family. They read all the time. Maggie is a huge fan of stories. And according to her, the books whisper to her. Like she'll put a book under her pillow and hear it whispering to her at night. But one night, where the book opens, she realizes that there is a stranger who has come outside their door, standing under a lamplight, and he doesn't seem to be going anywhere. It's making her uncomfortable. She goes and tells her father, Mo, and he instantly knows who this person is. And his name is Dustfinger. And even more kind of uncertain, a little bit unsettling, is that he calls him Silver Tongue. And this is all new information to Maggie. Maggie doesn't know who Dustfinger is. She doesn't understand why he's calling her father Silver Tongue and why they are discussing this idea of someone looking for her father. It's just all this very tense kind of moment. And of course, Maggie, being a curious child, does not go to bed when she should. She listens in at the door. And then we end up learning the next morning that they are about to go on the run. Her father tells her they're going on a trip, going to visit an aunt, the aunt of her mother. So I guess like her great aunt. And there's not much more discussed. But Maggie knows that in reality, this isn't a normal visit. They're going to the aunt either for safety. And also that morning, her father has been very short with her, something that doesn't seem to be very normal. And it's while he's trying to wrap this mysterious book. So she knows that's important too. They end up having Dustfinger come along, but Maggie knows that's probably not a good idea. But he has history with her father, so they seem to have an understanding, and they all end up going south to visit the supposed aunt named Eleanor, who's very eccentric, also loves books. So, I mean, this is a good family to be a part of, apparently. But while there, this is where the action really kind of amps up. Long story short, Mo ends up being taken by these men in the night, and they are the henchmen for a sinister villain named Capricorn, who is also quite scary. He seems to be a man known for enjoying inflicting pain, causing chaos, and he wants this book that Mo has been hiding for years and years. And so now Maggie, along with Eleanor, along with Dustfinger, now come together and go off to meet Capricorn, find her father, and strike a deal in order to get her father back. And that just ends up getting them in deeper trouble. And they start to understand the magic surrounding why these beings are even in our world, because Dustfinger, Capricorn, and Capricorn's head henchman, Basta, shouldn't be here. They're actually from a book called Inkheart. I believe that we're going to stop here before we get into actual discussions. But for now, if all of that sounds familiar and you feel confident that you did read up to chapter 18, then join us for the full spoilered discussion that's about to happen.
So I have a question that I want to ask you because it's something that bothers me. We had our hype episode last week where we read through the synopsis that's on the back of the book. And I think that synopsis was spoilery because we didn't actually figure out that these were book characters until the last probably 2 or 3 chapters of today's reading. Like I feel like the synopsis spoiled that for me because Maggie the entire time doesn't know what's happening. She doesn't know these are book characters and keeps telling us that there's something wrong, and we already know. And so and that thing that we already know wasn't the author's doing. I mean, I don't know. Maybe the author did write this synopsis, but I do feel as though we were cheated out of that little bit of tension with our main character. How did you feel about that?
I can totally understand what you mean. I actually was ready for you to say that the synopsis was kind of not fully accurate. I feel as though the way they were describing the events, I was imagining that that opening night when we were meeting Maggie and her father, that's when the characters were going to come out of the book. And I was like, when are they going to read this book and characters are going to come? Like
Yeah,
I
I
was
did have that
expecting a
thought.
different order. Yeah. And I think it's really funny to think that this was such a vague synopsis. We literally only got a paragraph and it still kind of messed up our reading. Sometimes it can be fun and can be purposeful having the reader know more than the character. I've seen that done very well in the past by other authors, but it also can go wrong and feel as though, what are we doing here? Why are we watching this character fumble when we have the answer? Like when
Right.
we know what's going on. So I suppose that that's really frustrating, especially in the genre that we're dealing with. And even with it being, I don't know, maybe it's because it's middle grade and they would want the kids to get a bit of a head start, kind of
That could
anticipating
be.
what's going on. But it did take us a long time to get there. And it probably is because it is a chonky middle grade. So that's why it took so long. But I felt as though we were circling around this idea of why these these men want Mo and what his abilities are. And I was like, where are we going with this? Like, why is it taking us? Like, this became a journey book, actually.
Yes.
A little bit. We were traveling multiple times. We were in the car multiple times. One thing that I think is interesting, and we can definitely circle back to this previous conversation if we've got more to say, but I think it speaks to what was not as expected, I suppose. And I'm not blaming the synopsis for this, but I just think that this is rare nowadays in middle grade, is for us to have a mostly adult cast of characters.
Yeah.
Because we really only have Maggie, our 12-year-old, and she's surrounded by adults. By the end of this actual section, we did gain a young boy. I'm assuming he's Aladdin, maybe, or something to that effect, because there was a young character that was pulled out of a classic book from, I can't remember what the title is. What is the title?
Is it Aladdin and the King of Thieves? It might be
But like
Arabian
the
Nights.
works are Arabian Nights, aren't they? Like the general works. There was a whole discussion about it. I did actually find it in my e-copy, so I'm going to read the quote. Maggie didn't know much about The 1001 Nights, except that it was really a book in many volumes. The copy that Darius had given Mo could only be a small selection. Were Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves in it? And Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp? Which story would Mo read? And in this scene, a young boy is pulled from that story, and I'm wondering if it's Aladdin, because I've actually never read the original text, so I don't know how old he's meant to be. I'm imagining like a teen thief, because Maggie did think he might be a few years older than her, but either way, it's the second child that we've gotten in this story that is for middle grade readers, and I feel like that's kind of rare to see nowadays.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't even think about that, but most middle grade, they center around characters that are similar to them, and almost parents seem to be vacant in a lot of middle grade that I have read, or just kind of clueless throughout the story, which isn't the case here. We have the adults really holding all of the cards, and Maggie just being along for the ride. I know that, I mean, based on the synopsis, she will be important to the story because she, I think, is going to be the linchpin on actually sending these characters maybe back to their stories. But for now, yeah, that is interesting that she's the only kid other than now we have this new edition.
And the only other book I can think of that does this, which is why I really enjoy it, is The Westing Game by Ellen Raskin. That has a full cast of characters, at least a dozen, and only one of them is a child named Turtle. And you jump around to different perspectives. So that's a little bit different, where we
Yeah.
truly are in the minds of different people, following them about this, apartment building. Whereas here we are, for the most part, in Maggie's head. At one point I thought we switched to Eleanor for a
Yes,
brief
we did.
moment. Yeah, it was after Mo was taken. Eleanor is trying to console this child, and she's not very good with children, and I kind of relate to it. I loved how she was looking our main character up and down, thinking, oh God, what is this child going to do to my books, my precious books? And like telling her not to eat or not to be anywhere near them. And I was like, yeah, I kind of get Eleanor. I understand her, uncertainty around Maggie. But at that one point, when we are in Eleanor's head for a very brief amount of time, we are seeing the struggle that she has as an adult who doesn't have a child, doesn't really understand how to be a caregiver or caretaker. How do you help a child who's just lost their second parent and doesn't really know how or when that person's going to come back into their lives?
Yeah, and you can tell Eleanor, I really like Eleanor's character, to be honest. She's very relatable. Not only because I also don't know how to deal with children, but just the thought process that she goes through of like, I would rather be home with my books. I don't really want to be doing all of these XYZ things. And but she still has a really good heart in the sense that she wants to take care of Eleanor or of Maggie. And Maggie even says at one point in time when Eleanor's giving her a little bit of crap, but like she does bend on certain things when she ended up turning off the burglar alarm so they could have their fire show at night. She says, "Were you this nice to my mom?" I think. I can't remember exactly how it was worded, but it was just a cute little moment between both of them. And yeah, I really like Eleanor's character. I think that she adds a little bit of sass and reluctance, because Mo is reluctant in the fact that he knows fully what is going on. He knows how dangerous it is. He has his own, if we want to, briefly mention the fact that he's the one who is bringing in the characters from books and they are trading places with living beings. And so he is terrified that this is going to happen to his daughter. And with that fear, he has reluctance. But Eleanor is more reluctant because she's like, I don't want to be involved. I was perfectly happy hiding your book and reading it because I've never read it before. And you guys can go off on your own little adventure, but I want to stay here at home. And I don't know, I like characters that are like that. I don't want an adventure. I'm not here for it. And then of course we have Maggie, who really wants to know what's going on, and she's okay with an adventure, but she doesn't like the fact that she's not in the know.
Mm-hmm. I love the various kind of dynamic that we have here with the different characters, because we do have the reluctant adventurer Eleanor, who says, okay, so we better be done within 24 hours. I want to be back home drinking my coffee, safe with my books. Like, let's snap, let's get this done. And I also am fascinated, actually, I'm going to go back to when you mentioned Mo's ability, and that it isn't simply pulling a character out of a book or an item out of a book. It seems as though this ability requires balance. Whereas if you take something, you also must give something. And because Mo doesn't know actually how to control his power, how it works, he can never feel certain about what he's actually going to take or what he's going to give. It's all kind of a gamble for him. It's very interesting to consider, and also totally makes sense. Whereas, yeah, if you take a person or take an object, why shouldn't you have that object replaced or that person replaced? It does feel like it's a weird trade that no one signed up for, and these beings are so terrified. And what's weird about it, and what kind of makes me itchy to know if we'll ever get the other side, is what's it like on the other side for those
Yeah.
people. There's even one moment where, oh my gosh, it kind of was a bit sad, where he ends up trying to get his wife back and figure out what's going on. And he ends up pulling this man of glass, this character made of glass. Two sad things. And one of them's a little bit funny, and I just feel badly about it. But when the glass man comes out, the postman is just suddenly sucked out, doesn't know what's going on. He finds his bike, and that's just, no one says anything else about that. And while that's a little bit kind of humor, there's also this sadness of saying that postman probably had a family and he just disappeared one day on his route. What's going on? And that man has no idea what happened or why it happened. So he's just been thrown into this book, this realm that he's not used to. And we see that, at least we can interpret it based on the way the characters feel in our world, because at the beginning, before they kind of got a handle of where they were, Capricorn, Basta, and Dustfinger were all terrified. Even this dark, sinister villain Capricorn was terrified to not know where they were. Why were they there? And is Mo this all-powerful being? And there does seem to still be this give and take, or this big question where they don't believe him. And I think that that is a really interesting theme that's going on, where is who is lying, who is telling the truth, and who are we believing? Because that's something that not only do our villains have to deal with, because they refuse to believe Mo when he says, I genuinely cannot control this. If something happens, it's not my fault. I don't have the ability to know what's going to happen if you have me read aloud this book. Meanwhile, he's lying to his daughter. So even though he's telling the absolute truth to these villains, he's lying to his daughter, and his daughter has been struggling with that for quite a bit of time. I think it's been mentioned 3 or 4 times, where she's realizing, wow, my father lies to me. Like, he's been hiding this from me, and he's now refusing to tell me the truth when I'm actually being direct with him. And obviously his intention is to keep her safe. But the father-daughter, parent-child relationship seems to be a really big theme in this book, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, actually, with that conversation, or with that thought process that Eleanor was going through, she had a really meaningful quote. I wish I would have written it down, where she talks about how a lot of times parents do try to protect their children by lying to them, but they don't realize what horror stories that their children will make up to explain the things they don't understand. And I just thought that was such an interesting way of thinking about it, because they do have, great imaginations. And so, yeah, why wouldn't they fill in an uncertainty with something scary? Another
Mhm.
thing I've really enjoyed about the book is so you mentioned Mo going through the process of practicing his ability to try and figure it out, but it was almost like a science experiment, right? He would not read with Meggie in the room because he didn't want to risk her going into a book. But when the mailman happened, he realized that doors and walls don't protect people. Now, when he was a kid, I think the first thing that came through was a dead cat from Huckleberry Finn. I think that's what it was. And he didn't realize, like, that anything was exchanged in that moment, and then it almost became a game of, like, what can I pull out this time? And he kept a whole bunch of mementos. He actually made a box for Meggie with a lot of the different items that have come from books. And I think I really like it when books dive into a character trying to figure out their abilities, the trial and the error of, can I control what I'm doing? Or is it just random chance? And in this instance, I don't know. As you said, we don't know if we're getting the full story from Mo. We think that we are, but in Maggie's head, we know that he's been lying to us. And so maybe he does have more control than he's saying. I don't think he's lying about being able to choose who goes and who comes out of a story. But I also think that his storytelling ability was really something that shined in the last couple of scenes. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I love the way that Eleanor described him telling the story.
Yeah, everyone felt so immersed.
Yes.
That was really lovely. The descriptions where almost like everything was kind of coming off the page and they felt like they
Mm,
could feel the sand. They were there on Treasure Island. That was really lovely. And we can definitely talk about that more, but I think it also happened around the same time where when they were reading Treasure Island, Maggie was picking up that not only is her father this great storyteller, but he can semi try to figure out his powers. Again, this idea of like experimentation, where clearly there is that one pivotal character. I'm assuming it's the villain in Treasure Island. I haven't read that classic myself, but she notices that he purposely
mm,
missaid that character's name slightly differently every time so that that character couldn't hear him in a way where he couldn't hear him being called, I think it was described. And
yes.
so it almost provides this idea where like you're looking over the scene of these characters and you feel like you hear your name being called and you would look up, or look around to see who's calling my name, and then that character gets pulled from the book. And the way he tried to work around it is like linguistic pronunciation, like let me pronounce this differently so then this character isn't identifying with me and I don't pull him from the book. I thought that was really fascinating. But yeah, the magic of him being able to read it aloud, and in comparison to Darius, who is another character, a side character in this book, who was supposed to be the replacement for Mo, who has been able to pull characters out, objects out, but it's always a bit wonky and kind of goes wrong. It sounds as though he hasn't mastered the idea of pulling anyone out who's whole. So, for instance, there's a character that they call Flat Nose. I'm imagining it's because he arrived without his nose, because Darius isn't that good at what he's doing. And even Capricorn, our villain, mentions that he's been holding off and waiting for Mo to then help him bring a certain character out because he's like, I can't have Darius do it because he'll bring the character without a head or something. Like he's like, I can't trust that Darius will bring this person whole, so it's on you. And so we do have this comparison of someone who's very, I don't know, naturally good at it or just has this affinity and is actually literally bringing the story to life, even for the listeners around him. And then we have Darius, who apparently can just kind of do it, but he's clearly not anywhere near as gifted.
Yeah, it is. It's intriguing that we have multiple characters that have the same gift and without really a connection. I can't remember. Did they describe how they found Darius?
I think he was just a bookseller. I think they found him in like a secondhand bookstore, they said, and just took him took him with him, and he's like, "Okay, this is my life now."
They seem to be, okay on kidnapping individuals. They even have like little cells that they call holes that they put people in. That part, I thought, this is one of the reasons I absolutely love having a character like Eleanor in the story because when they decided to bring Maggie and Eleanor, so Dustfinger convinces them to go after Capricorn after he's taken Mo. And so they're all riding together. Dustfinger obviously is betraying him or betraying them for a purpose. We find out later that he was promised that he'll get to go back into his storybook, which is also kind of just a very sad existence. Which
Mhm.
I want to talk about that too, about a fictional character being pulled into our. Actually, you were talking about that with the glass boy, and we never went back to that. The fact
I
that he was a fictional
know.
character that came into our story and ended up dying because he was made of glass, which was not meant for our world. I just think it's a very
Yeah,
sad sentiment.
he shattered, and I just,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like, that's heartbreaking to think, like, especially because he likely entered the world in the same way that the other characters did, which was fear,
Mhm.
confusion, and so his last moment was just this terrifying thing, and then, yeah, him just breaking into all of these shards. So that was the other I was thinking about that as you said, I'm like, "I never finished that anecdote." Like, we were just focusing on the postman. But yes, so these characters are just being ripped from everything that they know. And so we're also getting this idea of like home. And Eleanor is a great example of that where she knows her home. It's
Mhm.
comforting and she's very certain about her place and she's been in the same home forever. She's built this lovely collection of books. So she knows every inch of her home whereas now in comparison we have these characters and even Maggie and Mo, who are almost nomadic. You know, they've been traveling, moving about, and it took 4 or 5 years for these villains to finally find Mo and his daughter and track down the book. So they've been moving, and there's even a moment where Maggie says, "We have like a lot of distant relatives," because he's always having them visit relatives as they're trying to figure things out in their van, in their camper van. But yes, to get back to Dustfinger, he's another tragic character that we see, and he's not trusted. You understand why we're not trusting him because he's given us reason to, but that doesn't change the fact that he is feeling true emotions and loss and just wants to get home. You kind of
Yeah.
get why he would almost sacrifice everything just to do that because it's kind of breaking him. It really is.
Yeah. And that leads me back to the comment I was gonna make about Eleanor. Sorry, full circle, friends. We're going on a journey tonight.
We're doing our best.
Yes. So Eleanor has been kind of the constant person to judge Dustfinger. And I love her sass. She's even done it with Capricorn a couple of times as well, where, she got frustrated that they were putting her in a hole. And then Dustfinger comes up multiple times and she just keeps telling Mo, like, he's a bad person. Why do we feel bad for him? We don't feel bad for him. He's horrible. He doesn't have a heart. And I love the dynamic of having a character who is pointing out the flaws when someone else is so willing to forgive. And we know why. Like, we know that Mo is seeing the side of things where he is the reason that Dustfinger has been displaced, and he knows the tragedy of it because his wife was taken from him. So he knows it firsthand. And yeah, I really appreciated the difference between all of the different characters, but especially her.
Yeah, we may be biased because we've already said that there are certain reasons why we just identify with Eleanor. Yes, we love books. Yes, we don't understand children. There are many reasons why we kind of vibe with Eleanor, but I think what's really fun about it as adults reading this middle grade is that she kind of does speak for the like real world normal adult population, because everyone else is connected to this magic. Obviously Maggie is very young, and I think just being a youth, being 12 years old and still being open to the idea of imagination, magic, she hasn't been tainted by the real world, the kind of oppressive pessimism that we may get as we get older. And so then we have Eleanor, who is not a part of this world at all. She's not connected to them. She kind of just been thrown in. This wasn't really her choice. Her, nephew Mo just kind of moseys up and says, "Hey, let me help you bind your books. Oh, also, I'm now kidnapped and you have to go on an adventure with my daughter. Sorry." So she's just kind of thrown in. And so she's almost our perspective for the reader. So Maggie may be the perspective for the children who are reading this book. They're seeing it through her eyes. They're reacting through her eyes. But Eleanor is us in these moments. And I do really love that, even when all of this chaos is going on and she's yelling, "Abduction! We're being abducted! We are being kidnapped! Like this, we need to be allowed to go home. We're going to call the police." She's the rational person. Even when the burglars were around, she says, they cut my telephone wire. So now, trying to reach the authorities. And I love the moment where she thinks, I probably should get a cell phone. That's actually it's probably a good idea. And so she was just really funny, even with this, immediate distaste for Dustfinger. Like right away, she does not like him. She does not trust him at all. And even after Mo is taken and Dustfinger is trying to convince Maggie to join him, take the book, and, go get her father, I think that it's Maggie and Dustfinger outside, and then maybe Eleanor is through a window. I think she's inside calling down to them. And as the other two are, collaborating, Dustfinger says, "We should go, but we shouldn't bring her." And he whispers it. And then she goes and turns to, Eleanor. I think Eleanor's like, "Yeah, he doesn't want me to come, but I'm coming." And there's just this awareness that these two characters are like, "No, I know what you're doing, but I'm going to come anyway."
Yeah, I do. I like it. I think it's a very fun back and forth between them. Well, is there anything else we want to discuss before we get to our last three, or our final three questions, I guess, that we always go through?
No, I think I'm ready to start answering them. So Danny, I'm going to pose these questions, meaning you have to answer them first.
Boo.
That's what you get for making me do the summary. So the questions are, what's your current rating? Who is your favorite character? I think we know who our favorite character is. It's fine. Though, honestly, most of the characters are quite fun in their own way and seem purposeful. And then what is a question that you have going into the second third of this book?
I'll answer them in reverse order, as we
Fun.
normally do.
We should start asking them in reverse order the number of times we answer them in that
way. So the question that I still have is, are we going to get the perspective of someone who got sucked into a story? I would like to know, especially Maggie's mom, because she's been in the story for 3 years. I mean, I would even like to know the mailman. Did he get sucked into the same story? Because we do have the discussion that Mo had, that Capricorn is still in the story. Like, he's still in the book. And so taking a character out didn't deplete or delete him from the text, which means her mom is in this story with a very scary villain. So yeah, I'm interested to know her perspective, or if she's somehow going to get sucked out of the book and then we'll get it that way. I'm not sure, but I would like to know that. That is my question there. And then as far as my favorite character, yes, I like Eleanor. I think that she's fantastic. I would say my second favorite character is probably Mo. I have really enjoyed his perspective. I like Maggie too. I mean, I really like all of our cast of characters, other than obviously the villains. But I enjoy Dustfinger as well. His little quips that he makes every once in a while, I enjoy him. But I like Mo's care for his daughter, his kind of a mystery behind his magic and the trials and stuff that he's gone through. I like his character as well, but he doesn't beat Eleanor for me. And then my rating for the book, I would say right now it's sitting at a 4-star. I think that if I had read this book at a different time, I might feel like it was higher. But I recently read The Unlikely Escape of Uriah Heep, and I did not enjoy that book. And I do think this book is much better. I am enjoying this book way more than that story. And honestly, I think I didn't enjoy that story because I didn't understand a lot of the literary references. It was definitely meant for someone who had read a lot of classical literature and could get a whole bunch of the Easter eggs and things like that. But because it was a story that's very similar, pulling characters out of a book, having them be evil, having them want to stay in the world because this is a better story for them. Like, there's a lot of similar themes that I'm seeing. And because I just read that like last month, I think it's maybe made this book not be as enjoyable for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does, especially because I have told you, Danny, of two other books that I'm, have recently read and I'm currently reading, and that's been very hard to separate them because I keep comparing. So I think that we just do that, and it's crazy the timing of when you pick up books. I think that's something that we can talk about another day, where you start to realize, wow, I'm picking up the same books that have the same themes. What is going on? And what's wild is this book obviously came out first.
Yeah.
And you are still obviously influenced by the fact that you read the other book first. So that's your frame of reference. What's crazy is I fully agree, because I tried to read Uriah Heep with you. Life got really crazy. I ended up DNFing it, but really I only read a couple chapters and I liked what I had read, but I didn't have the capacity to actually add it to my TBR for that month. But the summer before, I read Library of the Unwritten, which is also featuring the theme of characters coming out of books. You don't have to read the book to have them. I think they just kind of pop out. They just come out, but it's the same concept where the goal is to bring the character back into their book, and the character doesn't want to be in their book because, yeah, the whole theme is, I don't like where my story's going. Why would I want to get back in that book? Because that book sucks for me. So I totally get that, but that's really fascinating. And I had the same idea. But for me to answer the questions, I'll be piggybacking off of a few of things you said. So my question is, will Maggie be sucked into that book at some point? Because we also know, obviously, there's a reveal that Capricorn did keep one copy of Inkheart. That's another thing we never really discussed, where he actually ended up burning all of the copies, supposedly, obviously leading Dustfinger to be extremely distraught, and he ends up leaving. And then at the end of that scene, we realize, or at the end of this section, we realize that Capricorn did keep one copy. And he intends to obviously use it to bring another character into the real world. But I am wondering that, yeah, that could be a moment where, when Capricorn forces Mo to read that, will Maggie be the one sucked in to bring that? And then Maggie can meet her mom. And that would be really fascinating. So I'm wondering if that'll happen, because right now Maggie's just observing and kind of trying to grasp everything. She's a main character, but she's very observant and not really impacting. She's kind of been a pawn for a few people, and she's trying to play catch up. Now, the second question we were discussing was favorite characters. Eleanor, of course. Eleanor's great. She's so funny, and I love her. We also have to do a shout out to a character that we never mentioned, but Gwen, which is the little marten that has horns and is a bit of a companion to Dustfinger. I think that pet, or that creature, does soften Dustfinger and helps provide this kind of texture to his character, because he obviously does care. And we were in his perspective. Now that I think about it, we did
We were.
for just a brief amount of time. So that's an interesting choice for like narration anyways. And then with my rating, I was thinking about a 4 as well. And I was wondering if I had read this, especially as a middle grade, if I was at that age, I think I would really eat this up and really love it. Yeah. And we read so much, and we have this year read quite a few biblio stories where characters are popped out of books. So I think that has impacted it. But at the same time, I think this one so far has been the best written one compared to the two adult books. Yeah, because even Library of the Unwritten, I thought it was fine, but I think I ended up giving it something like a 3-star range, whereas this one's far more developed. And I think I can see where, the author is going with all of these like relationships, and it just feels like a more complex world. And I do love the trade system where one person comes in, one person goes out. That switches things up for me. I think that's really fun. So yeah, we're feeling 4-star range. This is a great start to season 2, first month with our translation Inkheart by Cornelia Funke. And I think we should probably sign off now. We've been chatting for quite some time. It's quite late here and we probably need to go to bed, but you all, it might be the morning for you when you're listening to this. So we're going to say goodbye to you. But before we do, don't forget that next Friday we will have read 2/3 of the book. So we're starting chapter 19 and we will be finishing with chapter 37. So read through chapter 37, come back here, same time, same place, and hopefully we will continue enjoying this narrative. Happy reading, friends. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Not Reading for Content. Be sure to check the description for a schedule of our upcoming reads for this season. For reminders and other updates, you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Not Reading for Content. Where else can the listeners find you, Leandra?
I have a booktube and an Instagram. My booktube is at Leandra the TBR0, and my Instagram is at Leandra_the TBR0. How about you, Danny?
I have the same platforms. Both can be found at danny.dabbles. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to tune in next Friday for our next episode.